All right, so Lane Kiffin's got an itch to scratch, and he wants you and everyone else to know about it. Of course, the Georgia versus Ole Miss game, which is not this coming up weekend, but is actually next weekend on the road in Oxford for the Dogs. Game time and kickoff has been announced, and it's going to be a 3:30 game with Alabama and LSU getting to primetime slot. Lane Kiffin had a press conference earlier this week, and he was asked about it, and, he expressed his disappointment, right? I don't keep up with who plays at what time every time over the course of a season, but apparently Ole Miss now will have 0 primetime games at home this coming season. And I have a couple of different, I don't know if they're contradictory thoughts or opinions. I don't think they are. You might think they are. First of all, I like the fact that when Lane Kiffin has a perceived, when he feels like he's been wronged or Ole Miss has been wronged in some type of way, I like that he's willing to address it publicly. That's something that I don't think there's enough of. Now, I understand that there are some things that maybe coaches can't get into, because whether it's a situation where they might be fined or reprimanded or other things that may prevent them from sort of expressing displeasure about something or whatever. But a lot of times it just seems like they just, don't have the balls, basically, to come out and say something or to complain. And that's not the case here with Lane Kiffin. Fans obviously enjoy night games. Not all of them. There are some segments of certain fan bases that prefer earlier games, and it's for different reasons. If you travel by car to watch your favorite team play, and it's maybe a 2, 3, 4 hour car ride for you, maybe you prefer the game to be a little bit later in the day so that you're not having to leave your house at 4 a.m, let's say, to get to a 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. tailgate for a noon kickoff. So, maybe for that reason, you're a fan that prefers afternoon or primetime games. Students generally prefer games that start later in the day. Obviously, college students aren't normally in the habit of getting up at 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the morning for an 8 a.m. tailgate and a noon kickoff, right? I don't think that's breaking news to anybody. Again, not every older person, but I think a significant number of older fans, at least ones that I have talked to, ones that I know personally, prefer earlier kickoffs as opposed to late. Again, they have their own set of reasons as to why that is. But I think everyone, for the most part, will agree that in terms of providing the most difficult home environment for an opposing team to play in, prime time is probably the most difficult spot for an opposing team to go into and play. I think an afternoon game can be equally as difficult as a primetime slot, depending on the significance of the game. Is it two highly ranked teams? Is it a rivalry game? Something like that. I think I've seen 3:30 atmospheres that are every bit as good as primetime atmospheres. And I've seen noon games on occasion have that type of an atmosphere, but I do think it's on a diminishing rate of return as you get earlier in the day. I think you're most likely, I think, to have the most difficult home environment at a primetime game. I think second on the list would be the afternoon, the typical 3:30 Eastern type time slot. And then the noon would be last on that list. And again, it's not to suggest that it's impossible to it's impossible to have a massive home field and crowd advantage at a noon game. It's not. There are lots of factors. Who are you playing? Is it a rivalry? Are they a highly ranked team? There's a lot that goes into that. But generally speaking, if you were to take let's take the Ohio State Penn State game as an example that's coming up this weekend. And that game's being played at noon, part of Fox's big noon kickoff. Okay. I expect that atmosphere to be insane at Penn State at noon, okay? It's going to be a difficult environment for Ohio State to go into. If the game was in prime time, would it be more difficult? I think it probably would. And that's not to say that it won't be difficult at noon, but it's kind of a general understanding. I mean, Look, well, we can be honest about it. A lot of people sit around drinking all day and then they go to the game at 7:30. So they're loud. You ever been around a bunch of drunk people? They're loud. They're generally loud. Even people who are generally quiet or generally not loud, once they get good and souped up, they tend to become loud. So there are obvious advantages to having these games at night. So from that perspective, I can appreciate, if I'm an Ole Miss fan who loves primetime games, who loves going to home games at night, I 100% back and appreciate my coach, Lane Kiffin, in that instance, for going out in front of the media and saying, I don't think this is right. Let me guess, LSU's getting another home night game. Wow, what a shocker. I'm surprised. You know, what about us? Are we ever going to get one? We were in the top 10. We're a top 15 team this year. We can't get a home night game. I would be 100% on board if I was an Ole Miss fan who enjoyed night games and understood the advantage that playing at night can have. I would 100% be in total favor and agreement with my head coach kind of going out there and fighting for the fans. Now, we all kind of know that the reason a coach would fight for that is because it gives his team an advantage, and sort of the secondary reasoning would be, well, that's what the fans want. So I can come up to the microphone and pretend I'm kind of sticking up for the fans when really he just wants a bigger home field environment. But it's one and the same. It's one and the same. So I completely understand Lane Kiffin doing it. If I'm an Ole Miss fan, I'm happy he did it. And all of the above. And there have been years, I don't go to games anymore because I stay home and work on Saturdays. So I don't go to games anymore, regardless of what time they are. But there's been years in the recent past, in the last 4 or 5 years, where Georgia fans have expressed this same sort of sentiment or displeasure with the fact that in their minds, Georgia's not getting any or enough primetime games. And I didn't go back through Ole Miss's schedule or Georgia's schedule or anybody's schedule to try to count up how many primetime games. So this is all anecdotal based off of just things I hear. Again, I don't have some kind of running list where I keep track of how many primetime games each team has gotten at home over the last 10 years. I don't know what that number is. I just know that there have been years recently where Georgia fans have expressed the same type of sort of frustration that Lane Kiffin expressed publicly to the media in this press conference about getting left out, not getting any primetime big home games. Here's the thing. I don't really know. I don't think Lane Kiffin complaining to the media is going to do any good. I don't think that's going to somehow get Ole Miss a primetime game next year that they otherwise wouldn't have gotten. It's not going to do any good to call the SEC office. I'm sure most of you know this and are aware of this, but the individual team, in this case Ole Miss, or the conference, in this case SEC, has absolutely nothing to do with what time the game kicks off. Nothing. That is all part of the TV contracts. These same TV contracts that we as fans, some people as fans, use as bragging points over other teams or other conferences, right? You give up certain things in order to be wrapped up in these huge TV contracts. The TV networks are the ones who are picking these time slots. And this has been the case really going back a long time, ever since conferences and teams started signing contracts with TV networks. And the reason should be obvious. If a TV network, in this case, let's say ABC, Disney, ESPN, who has the rights to all of the SEC games now, right? They look at the slate of games in a given week, and just as an example, I'll even pull up next week's slate of games here. And you can pretend like you're a ESPN or Disney or ABC or whatever the case executive, and you're the sole person that gets to make these decisions, okay? So we're fast forwarding, not this coming weekend, but the next weekend, because that's where this kind of all started with Lane Kiffin. You have the Georgia at Ole Miss, and as you can see, it's already been picked up as the 3:30 game on ABC, with the primetime game being Alabama and LSU, the noon game being Florida and Texas. And you can look at the rest of the slate of games: Mississippi State at Tennessee, Oklahoma at Missouri, South Carolina at Vandy. If you're in charge of programming at ABC, ESPN, Disney, whatever department there is picking the game times each week for these games, and you're handed this slate of games, What game are you putting in prime time? It's Alabama LSU. It's Alabama LSU. I completely understand where Lane Kiffin is coming from. I can understand where Ole Miss fans who are frustrated are coming from. I completely get it. And if you're going to be upset or you're going to be mad at somebody or frustrated at somebody, it's not going to do you any good to get frustrated at the SEC as an entity or Greg Sankey as the commissioner of the SEC. Your only option is to be mad at ESPN, ABC, Disney. And again, ask yourself, if you're the one running that program and you know that the primetime games are going to get, the primetime game is the money slot. That's just what it is. We all know this. The primetime game is going to attract the most eyeballs, followed by the 3:30 game and the noon game last. That's just the way it is. This isn't an opinion. These things have been tracked for decades in terms of what times people are watching college football on any random Saturday. Okay? And the primetime slot is the slot to have. Now, 3:30 and primetime, they're close. And in a given week, if the 3:30 matchup happens to be perceived by the public as a better matchup, there are weeks where the 3:30 matchup has higher numbers than the primetime matchup. There's also a lot of other things, obviously, that go into the numbers. You know, what games are you going up against, right? What game is on CBS at 3:30 opposite this Georgia Ole Miss game? That will have something to do with the number of people that watch the game. So it's not as cut and dry as just the straight numbers, but anyway, you get what I'm saying. It's ESPN's job to arrange these games in an order which they feel will attract the most eyeballs to ABC over the course of the day. So when they look at this slate of games and they see Alabama LSU on there, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's kind of a no-brainer to me that that's the primetime game. Now, I'll agree that it does seem like LSU gets a disproportionate number of home primetime games. I agree. But I also understand, I think, why that is, and that's because they create one of the best home field environments in all of college football. They've been a really good team a lot of the years, and they have a lot of good matchups there. And this is an example of that. The Alabama-LSU matchup over the last 10 to 15 years has been one of the best regular season matchups in all of college football. You got the old SEC West rivalry. You know, one of those two teams was winning the West a lot of years. Auburn won the SEC West in 17. But since then, Alabama won it in 18. LSU won it in 19. Bama in 20. Bama in 21. LSU in 22. Bama in 23. It's been either LSU or Bama win the West every year since 2018. This is a massive game every single year. The Ole Miss-Georgia game, it's a big game this year, no doubt. There's no question about it. Ole Miss is sitting on 2 losses. Georgia's only sitting on 1. Both teams technically still alive for the playoffs. Ole Miss kind of sitting on the bubble right now, but it's a huge game. There's no doubt. I'm not taking anything away from the Georgia-Ole Miss game. But again, from a network perspective, it seems pretty obvious to me why they went with Alabama LSU as opposed to Georgia Ole Miss. It just seems obvious to me. So again, I maybe I'm sounding contradictory here, even though I'm not necessarily intending to. I appreciate the fact that Lane Kiffin came out and sort of went to bat for the fans and his team and his program, saying, hey, you know, we're good too. We play a good brand of football here too. We're entertaining TV too. And we've got a top 20 matchup here. Number 2 right now, Georgia versus 19 Ole Miss. Where's our primetime game? I completely get it. So I understand his argument. I also understand why the people at ABC looked at this and went, yeah, Alabama at LSU. Yeah, that's going on in primetime. So anyway, there's been people ask me if I heard what Lane Kiffin said about it. And then I've had Georgia fans say, yeah, he's got, he used to do this to Georgia too. So I get it. I get it. But again, these TV contracts keep getting higher and higher and higher and higher and higher, right? This is a whole other separate issue here. But raise your hand if you've been complaining about the number of commercials in these college football games lately and saying to yourself, man, it sure does seem like there are more commercials now than there were 10 years ago. You ever find yourself saying that while you're watching these games? Well, why do you think that is? What do you think is paying for these $100 million TV contracts that these conferences are getting? What do you think's paying for that? Commercials during the games. That's what's paying. That's what's paying for it. So again, you know, it's kind of a give from one and a take from the other. You know, yeah, these schools are getting a ton of money. Where's that money coming from? Well, in the SEC's case, it's coming from ABC, Disney, ESPN. Where does ABC, Disney, and ESPN get their money? It doesn't grow on trees. You know where they get it? Advertising, commercials. So you want $100 million, $150 million a year, ABC's got to get that money from somewhere before they can give it to you. Where are they getting it from? They're stuffing more commercials into games. So you're not wrong. They are putting more commercials into games. Why do the games take 4 hours to play? Because there's an hour's worth of commercials. That's why. So you're right there. There is more commercials in the game because of the TV money. But anyway, that's my thoughts on that. I appreciate Lane Kiffin sticking up for his team, his fans, and his program. I also understand why the Alabama LSU is the primetime game. Had people ask me about it. So there it is. There you go. Have a good morning.